All right. We can go ahead and get started. So, everybody, welcome to MPG's webinar series. We are thrilled to have you join us. If this is your first time, welcome. I'm going to get started on some introductions and information about MPG, but as we get started, I'm going to invite you all to complete this poll so we can kind of gauge our audience, get to know who's here today. So I just launched that. Feel free to respond to that as I go through. Elisa, if you wouldn't mind clicking to the next slide. Perfect. So then before we begin, I want to take a minute to tell you guys a little bit about Manhattan Psychology Group. We were established in 2011 by Dr. Joshua Rosenthal, and we've grown into a team of over 300 dedicated professionals. Our team includes skilled adult and child psychologists, neuropsychologists, board-certified behavior analysts, and special educators and ABA therapists. As a team, we are committed to wraparound care, which includes our wide range of services from mental health and testing to ABA and educational services. This holistic approach allows us to address various needs and challenges with compassion and care. We provide services to clients out of our Upper West Side and Long Island City offices, in-home, school, and clinic-based settings, as well as through telehealth. Our team is committed to serving individuals, couples, and families of all ages in diverse settings. We are also pleased to offer these free monthly webinars for parents and professionals, where we will continue to learn and foster meaningful connections. And then our vision at MPG is to create a future where individuals and their families feel supported, connected, and empowered. And our mission is to provide multidisciplinary integrated support for individuals and their families who experience mental health, behavioral, and educational challenges. And before I hand it over, I'm excited to announce today's speaker, Dr. Elisa Trugerman. She's a New York State licensed psychologist and certified school psychologist. She received her bachelor's in biology and psychology at the University of Rochester and went on to earn her master's and doctoral degrees in clinical psychology from Hofstra University. She's also a subject matter expert in the evaluation of employer-based mental health programs, the quality assurance of outpatient and facility-based treatment services for health plans, and in the effectiveness of new technologies in the delivery of emotional well-being services. Additionally, she has a wealth of knowledge in consulting with companies utilizing digital platforms. Dr. Trugerman specializes in working with school-age children, teens, and young adults with a focus on learning, developmental, and motivational issues. She has been formally trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, interpersonal psychodynamic therapy, family systems, and parent management training. Her approach is holistic, working not only with families of her patients, but in consultation, collaboration with their healthcare providers, teachers, tutors, athletic coaches, and community-based leaders. She works with her patients to develop mutually agreed upon objectives that are measurable and to create self-sustaining solutions that can achieve long-term success. Dr. Trugerman has provided individual, family, and group therapy in a variety of clinical settings to address issues of anxiety, depression, and stress, learning disabilities, ADHD, self-esteem, substance abuse, parent-child conflict, and marital discord. And without further ado, I will let Dr. Trugerman take over.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I don't know where the morning went, but we have passed the noon hour. That was a mouthful. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Lakin. Appreciate it. I see through the poll that we have the percentage is much higher towards professionals on the webinar today. So I'll try my best to address it. I probably targeted this a bit more towards families and parents. But please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Admittedly, I won't be monitoring that, but I've asked the staff to interrupt me at any point in time, particularly if it's a detailed question about a clarification of any of the data that I'm presenting, and I'll do my best to do that. And I'm going to try and keep it conversational, and hopefully we'll have time for Q&A towards the end. So we've got some polling questions. I'm going to go over some things about the social media platforms and in particular the utilization. I'm going to present some of the pros and cons that we're seeing so far in the research and literature. And I'm going to also provide recommendations and some next steps potentially. This is definitely an area that's evolving. Staying on top of it is not easy for parents or professionals. So consider this more of a snapshot in time and stay tuned. We're all learning as we grow in this area. So you can see that I'm the one that's managing the slides. So do we have the next poll up at this point? Thank you. I'd like to get a sense as to your usage or your usage with your child, or for many of you, any of you that might be doing it and using it and talking about it with your patients, clients, the folks that you work with, and just get a sense of it. So obviously, lots of users on some form of social media. And let's see, there we go. I can see the poll coming in now, giving people a chance to respond. Lots of Facebook users, got a good amount of Instagram users, and then TikTok, YouTube, high on YouTube, and not too many on Snapchat. Twitter is low. Pinterest, some of you are maybe involved in Pinterest, maybe as you're building your own. I find it, sometimes I use it for pictorial things for my slides, but often, to be honest, it's more for personal and social reasons. And most of you are on it daily. Interesting. So, we're going to talk a little bit about what the kids are doing. The utilization is going to look different. I can and be sure of that and bring that to you. And how much engagement continues to remain one of the most significant concerns, and how long they're on it when they're engaging. So we'll be talking about all of that. I think you can close the poll at this point now. All right, so let's get to the next one. So I just want to put this into some context for us in terms of what we're going to be talking about, but I wanted to be clear about the fact that we have a variety of technology now that we're using, have access to for mental health. Social media tends to be, and that's where the predominance of this talk will be today, is really about some of the population level applications that are out there. It does provide the ability to see how folks are feeling, their mood, their levels of anxiety and depression. It's got some availability that we can do some real-time monitoring of people's mental health state. For the kids, one of the pros is going to be the accessibility to peer support. And that's important, particularly to groups of kids that are somewhat marginalized. There are some issues, clearly privacy issues, the algorithms that are being used, making sure that it doesn't become overused. And potentially one of the action items really will be some sort of partnership between both academia and research and the companies in terms of privacy standards. Clearly, there are some other things going on in digital mental health. Certainly, the deliverability of certain therapies or as an adjunct to therapy. Actually, there's some nice data that using some of the apps that provide CBIT can be very helpful in conjunction with therapy. It allows for some precision interventions. And it really addresses a problem we are having, which is lack of engagement with people from session to session and over time, as well as accessibility to folks. There's just wait lists, and there's a lot of people that don't have access to therapy. Smartphone is going to be able to provide information ongoing and also be part of being able to track people's moods, anxiety, lifestyle. And it'll be taking advantage of machine learning and some of the AI. There's going to need to be a lot of development around the data around that and how it's used. Starting to see some virtual reality monitoring and interventions that are happening, and they can provide also some increased engagement. I think it will be good for exposure type therapies for anxieties and phobias, and potentially I've seen some that are being developed in substance use, particularly cigarette smoking. And then we have the increase of AI and chatbots, and that's really in its infancy. But today we'll talk most about social media, but I just want to bring it into a frame of it being one of many aspects of applied technology in mental health. Okay, there we go. So just want to make sure, and I was concerned to some degree about people's familiarity with some of the most popular social media platforms. YouTube, we'll look at the utilization, is clearly one in which can be educational, and you're sharing videos. There's a lot of information that's available. Some concern possibly the supervision of what's being provided in it and the guidelines for it, not out. TikTok, similar medium video, but very short. The kids, especially maybe yourself, use this for sharing their talents. There are some privacy concerns. Snapchat is both messages, photos, and videos. The asset to it is kind of once it's looked at, it disappears. Stories that are developed in Snapchat only last about 24 hours. There are issues about the fact that it can map location. Instagram, again, many of you are big users, so that's a place for posting photos and videos, as you know. You can choose who follows you. That's a helpful thing. And there are privacy settings available to it. Be Real, that's allowing for in-the-moment selfies. We're hopeful that maybe as particularly girls who tend to be more image conscious are using these, using something like that, that potentially it takes out the need to doctor one's self up in many ways and allow you to present your real self. And there's some authenticity in that. There's no editing, there's no influencers. Twitch, and there's another one, popular often more with boys and young male adolescents, Twitch and Discord. Video gaming communities, allowing for music and videos as well, allows for the ability to game on it. And then there's Twitter, messaging application, of course, that we're all familiar with, maybe too familiar with in the news. So let's talk about utilization. This information is coming from the Pew Research Center, and hopefully as nonpartisan as we can have out there for particularly gaining information from the general public, think tank in Washington. And it provides a variety of different data points on a variety of social issues, one of them being social media. So here's what's really interesting. And as you saw in your own utilization, you know, Facebook is definitely not leading in the younger set anymore. So it's really decreased. It's probably at the level of some of the newer apps, but you know, the leader here is clearly YouTube, similar to some of your own data that you just provided today, but you're more heavy into Facebook, which the kids are not. The most popular ones are obviously TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram. And then below that, this massive drop in Facebook. And then you have some of the newer apps. You see Discord there. Look at the drop that Twitter had. I'm bringing this up because affected by the news, affected by the media. That's a big piece of what seems to often impact the utilization in the younger set, ourselves as well, but it really drives things quickly down. And then Twitch and Reddit and Be Real are just sort of coming into their own. Obviously, video platforming seems to be the most highly utilized. And the other thing that this data points out, change is constant. I mean, you can even see the changes between 22 and 23. Decreases of, in a few of them by at least 10% or so. So this is what I would really like to focus a bit on today, is how much are they using it? One of the most frequent questions I get clinically is that, you know, how much is too much? Parents are concerned. Actually, you'll see that kids are actually concerned also. And I think in terms of this data, this is online. So it's not just about social media, but you can see, like yourselves, they're on, less of them are on daily, but many of them are on several times a day. And a good portion of them are on it almost constantly. So that's online. That might include educational usage. It might include entertainment. But this next slide can help us differentiate that. So we're talking about social media in particular here. And I would have to say that you can see that, the reality here is that they're on, several times a day. They're on a proportion of them, 20% almost, YouTube, TikTok, are on almost constantly. Um, Once a day is far less frequent. So you've got a net daily usage on YouTube of 71%, and then 58 for TikTok, and for Snapchat a little less. So I think that while trying to measure, we have found that trying to measure hours of how much people are on is hard to do. There are some studies, I will talk about one that does do that, but the reality is that it's more realistic to ask about the frequency. And we think that that, from a self-report perspective, provides more accurate information. One interesting thing I want to bring up now is that about 38% of US adults support the concept of, banning TikTok for people ages 13 to 17. And yet, obviously, the teens are far less interested in banning TikTok, more around 20%. So another poll. Now, I'm gonna, while you're answering the questions, I'm gonna continue. There's really no right age. It's going to really depend on the child and the family. And there may even be the need within a family sometimes to have different restrictions, different limitations set for different siblings. As you all know, some of these timeframes relate to some of the developmental ages, cognitive abilities of children. So the large preponderance of you are suggesting that it needs to be 13 and up, which lines up with what came out from the COPA recommendation about 10 years ago. Interestingly enough, more recently, the state of Utah has legislation for not allowing it until they're 18. I think some of this is really more policy considerations. And I will say that some of what has been recommended to date hasn't necessarily been based on scientific evidence and research. So some recommendations that are generally being made on these age groups, from 8 to 10, you want to certainly consider limiting screen time, helping them find other activities to engage in. And if they're going to be choosing media, that it be more interactive, clearly nonviolent, educational, and pro-social. Towards the end of this, I have a recommendation for some social media applications that are really more appropriate for folks, kids that are 12 and under. As you get into the tween years, which is where you're going to see the utilization jump, as well as teens, it's going to be more conversational, and you need to engage them in media use, what they are seeing and reading, and with whom. And just an interesting side note on data, the average age for getting a phone in the USA is about 10. Takes usually also about 1 year for them to start to access social media. And then with each year, the accessibility and the frequency of how many apps increases thereafter. A very interesting finding is that when they're exposed younger, and when I say younger, meaning from 10 to 14, that age group has a tendency to find itself being exposed to some of the more negative experiences online than when the teens are 14 to 18. They also, at that age, if they start early and initiate early on social media, have a tendency to become more fixated on it and have difficulty, which we'll talk about later. So here are some of the research findings that are available. So there's the APA actually, and a lot of the data and information that I have pulling from some of the American Psychological Association. The APA did some social media focus groups, both with parents and teens. And it turned out that parents are far more worried about their kids being bullied online, and kids actually are more concerned about how social media use might affect their futures and other aspects of their life. They're more focused again on the image and potentially their current image as well as future image. And I'm sure parents and educators are making kids aware that there is a long life to what you put out on social media in many aspects, and it can trail for you. There was a survey that was done by Common Sense Media, and it was done with Dr. Jacqueline Nisi, who actually has some nice, has a good blog post available to folks, and she summarizes the literature frequently for parents in a fun kind of way, but it is summarizing the research. And I'll show that later in resources. It has shifted to a subscription-based fee-based access. But in this study done with Common Sense Media of about 1,400 adolescent girls ages 11 to 15, there were some interesting things that teens reported overall that social media has had pretty much mostly a neutral to positive impact on people their age versus negative. And that's helpful because I think there are some positive things that they can gain and use social media for. On the other hand, about 5 to 25%, depending upon the app that was being asked about. And this study actually did a nice job in making sure that it asked, are you using social media? How much are you using it? Frequency and consistency, and then which apps are you using? And then followed up with that. But depending upon the app, 5 to 25% of the girls reported that it had a negative impact on people their age. And it's clear that this is a concern. I think they, in this piece of research, yes, there was an ask of what the girls thought, the teens thought that could change that would make it better. And they actually went right to changing content and not having to be exposed to any negative content. And also the location sharing part of the application. So they have an awareness about safety concerns. In some other data that I have found from the UK that was studying causal pathways, that's a big part. The research currently, the information that I'm sharing, most of the summation points on research today are all correlational in terms of that we can see the associations in social media and problems in mental health. But one study that was looking at causal pathways in the UK with about 10,000 14-year-olds, and they did actually separate out how much the teens were using social media by hours, and they included all media, didn't differentiate between the different types, but there does seem to be some potential causality between the amount of time that's being spent and then how much it may be impacting their mental health, and that impact is greater with girls. So in other words, from the jump from 1 to 3 hours daily to 3 to 5 hours or 5 hours or more daily, the impact on their mental health and their well-being is impacted for both boys and girls at age 14, but the impact is greater for girls. There is some also emerging evidence around the experience of digital stress. And that is both exposure to social media, but also a digital component in terms of the phone and the constant notifications and digital overload, and also the expectation to be on all the time and be available. There's been, as I'm sure many folks are aware of, there's a fear of being left out, that they're gonna not be part of something. And they're looking for social approval online. So it really, we're seeing and starting to study the impact both of the social media and then what's coming at them in general and through the notifications that they're getting both online, on their phone, off their desktop. Um, so again, getting back to age, there's really no data yet available to indicate at what age children, teens are not affected by social media and when the risk becomes down to none. So we haven't been able to find that as of yet. I'm not sure we will, partially due to because kids and teens and parents and families are so variable, it may be difficult to pinpoint that. But we do see that the younger adolescents tend to run into more risks on social media. And the impact again, in terms of the impact of on teens, 11 to 13 for girls, 14 to 15 for boys. Another study in terms of the fact that the increase in social media exposure seems to decrease long-term potential life satisfaction a year later. And it's particularly it's earlier for girls, a little later for boys, but again, at a relatively young age. Yes, that. So I want to walk through a little bit about what I consider there are some positive things to social media and potentially the message we should be really giving teens, parents, helping parents give tweens, children, teens, is, you have to learn how to use social media positively and you need to avoid its negative downsides. So the good part about social media is that it provides socialization for kids and particularly for marginal groups that may not have it accessible to them within their own communities. It can provide entertainment. There's educational utility to much of the social media platforms. We're starting to see the kids, particularly on TikTok and Instagram, being able to use social media to develop their interests, any kind of civic engagement. There are some definite positives. What we are finding is that it's more about the quality of the screen time and the quality of the social media and what they're being exposed to that may impact our youth more than necessarily the quantity or the amount of time. And that the absolute exposure to the screen is not what's strongly associated. And there's really no single cause to the adverse of mental health outcomes. And it's really an unresolved issue about how it's really impacting the brain, although we're obviously seeing some differences between females and males. And of course, there's no shortage of potential stigma that can be, unfortunately, through bullying or exposure to maladaptive behaviors that can happen on social media as well. But I think we have to take a look at the good and the bad and the truly ugly side of it. I'm going to talk a little later about excessive use. Very often people talk about, I think my child's addicted to their phone or addicted to social media. That's a word that we have to use carefully. But we are seeing that there is some level of excessive use that can start to impact, sleep, exercise, their in-person relationships that are so important to their development as well. So another polling question.
Perfect. And this one, we're going to go ahead and respond in the chat. So what concerns you most about the use of social media by our youth? So you should have access to type in the chat and then I will go ahead and read them out loud as they come in. Bullying behaviors, inappropriate content, especially for young adolescents, and other bullying, inappropriate content, lack of control regarding exposure to content, negative impact on mental health, body image, suicide, or self-harm. Quite a few of the inappropriate comments, or sorry, inappropriate contents. Their self-esteem could be lowered, cyberbullying, the idea of fakeness and not reality. impact on self-image, bullying behavior towards LGBTQ teens, grooming, comparison to others, self-esteem, excessive time spent online, not knowing what they're seeing or hearing, so being unable to engage with them about it. Constant use, bullying, can't help monitor what's being said, so what she's saying versus what others are being said to their child. Predators, the frequency of reels on Instagram and TikTok can be addictive, leading to trouble with focusing or patience. Brain development, mental health, inappropriate relationships, the permanent, irreversible nature of sharing content online. Focus on internet rather than experiencing the world. So that's most of the ones that came on. There's a few extras about the inappropriate content, self-esteem, bullying, addiction.
Yeah, it seems to me, thanks very much, like, and it seems that there's a lot about the awareness of what kind of content is being made available, pushed out to our youth through social media, and an awareness that there's a lot of behaviors that are being that can be considered maladaptive. I think there's probably some room. We'll discuss at the very end of the presentation about some recommendations we may want to consider to support in terms of policy. There are probably some behaviors that we can really get the companies to scan for and look for and just take down. And I think actually our different varying professional associations and the APA inclusive, we could come up with a short list that we know for sure are not helpful and it can be harmful, especially to some of our youth who are more vulnerable. Not everybody is vulnerable to the same things, but we could do that. So content's a big one. It's interesting that the kids also see that as an issue, that they're starting to understand that that's what's problematic. Not everything is. I think the other theme that you mentioned was clearly, what's considered excessive and how it can interfere with life. And I'm going to go through some of that information and data. And I also think it's clear that there's a concern about it being distracted, used as a distraction, and may not provide enough positive influence. So let's move on. So the idea of, kind of creating what can be safe and what is sometimes available and seeing the positive and what can be used. So we should be using and encouraging social media for the purpose of social support. I think one of the comments about concern was how the bullying can potentially, or stigmatization, impact a marginalized group, but it can also provide the social support that one may not be able to get. I believe Tumblr has in the past been a place where the LGBTQ community has found support. So there are some apps that can be helpful in that regard. And we really do want to prioritize for our youth, the creative, educational, and positive aspects. And then we want to tailor it. It should be really tailored based on the capabilities of any individual child or teen, and frankly, within your family. I think, the old don't do as I say, do as I do. We have some ownership in terms of how we use social media and how we set up our own limits for ourselves and modeling that behavior. And each family has to make that decision for themselves. I think the recommendation is pretty clear for tweens, early adolescents, 10 to 14. We really need to monitor it. And we need to help them. The different apps have some different features. We don't really have any data to support that one app is better than the other, but knowing the features and the things that can be controlled within the app can possibly be very helpful for this age group. Having privacy settings, flagging certain things, and we want to really reduce the exposure to health risk behaviors and maladaptive behaviors. We've seen this, unfortunately. There are available content on harming oneself, and there's even harmful behaviors around eating that can be talked about, especially around image. And again, we're seeing the concern for how girls adapt to that. We have to look at, the cyber hate that's out there on marginal groups, and it needs to be minimized. And we want to limit the use of it for social comparison. I like the idea of the app that, is allowing them to be real, and starting to recognize that what's being posted through social media, a good portion of it has been edited and doctored and may not really reflect accuracy of life. And people don't tend to post when they're feeling difficult about themselves or down or when they don't look good. So it's a fictionalized environment. We have to help kids become aware of that. And quite frankly, I think less media apps. Pick a couple and let the kids work with those. Clearly, when they're younger, expose them to one at a time. But maybe less could be more in this instance. They don't need to have each and every one. And maybe that's a way to create choice, to sit and work with them about which apps they're going to use and have most access. So there's a lot of conversation around trying to how we can help coach their digital or media literacy. This is, again, tuned in more to parents. But I think it's something we can use in our fields of mental health with our patients and maybe with parent education. Clearly, frequent and short conversations. Try to discuss and talk with them about social media in short, sound bites, so to speak, in the car or maybe at the dinner table. We all know that the let's have the social media talk, it gets lost very quickly, and kids tune out. But discussing good and bad examples, discussing what's in the news about advertising, talking about algorithms. The kids kind of know about algorithms. Unfortunately, they seem to like the idea that, they know me and that they're being targeted and marketed. They don't find it creepy. They feel important. That's a little bit distorted. We want to make sure that they're not being fed so that we're increasing that desire to keep coming back, and it becoming excessive. I think there could be gradual access to platforms early on. I think it's okay for parents to begin to discuss and time, content, and where they want some limitations. And being open about that as the kids get old enough to understand it, as you're into 12, 13, 14, and talking with them about what kind of rules you want to set, and what in terms of reviewing any video games that you want them to have access to or not, learning expectations about how they need to be kind online as well as you expect them to be kind in person, helping them talking about how you're going to develop setting privacy settings. One of the things that can be done, since we're all on social media, is using it together and talking about it together, and watching, even an educational video about it or learning a new app. Sometimes I find it helpful to flip it and let them be kind of the ones that show me an app and how to use it and how I might be able to use it in one instance or another. And I think that you get to be able to work with kids in terms of, knowing how they think about it. I do think it's helpful for there to be a time where there's a free zone, screen-free zones, possibly at your dinner tables, setting a time period. We know that not using it before bed, not being on a blue screen when there's good data about that. And also using one screen at a time. I don't know if you've ever watched, but they could have something going on their desktop. There could be something going on their phone. There even could be the TV. One screen at a time. That feeding of information and distraction of multiple things at one time is probably not useful in terms of being productive, and it's also bringing in way too much stimulation all at once. And I think, depending upon each individual and their family, letting them know that there may be some, spot checking that's going to go on. We shouldn't be spying. We need to let them know about it, and we should be supporting, their autonomy needs as they're growing at 14, 15, 16, and making them a part of the discussion. getting their buy-in and their opinions, and giving them the rationale that we have for why we're setting certain rules, and engaging them. Screen time can become family time, and be used for bonding and promoting learning, and showing our kids what matters to you, what could matter to them. There are some apps out there, obviously, family sharing can be used. There's an app that I haven't had direct involvement with, but I've learned about, called Bark, which can help with parental control features, content monitoring for parents, managing screen time and website blocking, picking up inappropriate messaging in email or text. And I think if it could be used in a way in which that it allows to parents to then bring a conversation to kids, I see the utility in that. And for some parents, having better use of an app that brings all of that together, because it is difficult to know about all the different features that might be available. So Bark is one that's been recommended a bit. This was that list of some of the social media apps that can be available. I'm not going to go through them. I actually tend to work more with kids age 10 and up, but there's some good apps out there. If kids are going to have access to a phone prior to age 10, 11, maybe getting them involved in these, and they can have a place to post, as well as chat, and it's made appropriate for their ages. So I won't walk through those. And looking at the time, I know we want to have questions, and I still have a few slides to get through. So, when is it time to be concerned? When is it problematic? Big question, a frequent question for me. I think the word addiction, and as we have it currently, is really applied more to substances, potentially one behavior in gambling. But I think it's clear that when we can see that the use of it is interfering with daily activity and commitments, I'm most concerned, and where I see kids who seem to use both social media in particular, but also their use of all sorts of their phone use in many different ways, that when they're not engaging in in-person social interactions, that's the most frequent flag that I see in my practice. Anytime that I think that there's a concern about sleep and that they might be sneaking it, or that they're watching enough material that's negative that it's unsettling their sleep, that can be problematic. So looking at sleep. I often do an activity wheel with teens. Are they engaging in physical activity? We know that exercise is really good for their growth physically, but also their mental health. The other thing is asking if they have a desire to stop but feel like they can't, or that they feel like they have a craving for it, that they just can't, stay away from it. And they themselves can acknowledge that they're having an issue with that. That has that feel of like an addictive quality, but, seeing where they're at with it. And do they try to, lie or use any kind of deceptive behavior to gain that screen time when it's supposed to not be a time for the screen, not be a time for social media? Are they lying about how they use it, and whatnot? So I guess what I'm down to is it's really about whether it's creating dysfunction or has a functional interference in their life. So some conclusions, got to be involved, and got to give them a place where they can bring their concerns about social media. As I said, in one of the studies, 20% of kids are acknowledging that they're aware that there's something not good about it for them. We got to give them a place to talk about that, bring it up, and gain some adult, parental, clinician guidance around it. Include teens in your decision making about it, and using social media that's not inherently harmful. It is clear that that the content is definitely affecting them, and it seems to be mitigated by their pre-existing strengths and weaknesses. The literature right now, the research is limited. It's very limited by the fact that it's correlational, but it really is our best guide to date. and probably better than some policy decisions that are handed down without the research. Um, let's see, next, we're running low on time. So talking about policy, especially during an election year, just a few thoughts, trying to see if we can get an increase in funding for objective research around this. I think it's important that we involve the educational system and communities, all sorts of caregiving for kids and getting people to be helpful with that. I would like to see us make some requirements on the social media companies for protecting personal information, being more cautious about the use of algorithms. Um, they should be able to potentially enforce age limits and parental consent, and maybe even, I think actually in one of the research articles, there was the kids were actually saying that maybe as they're using certain parts of an app, parents should be reintroduced for consent. I thought that was interesting. There should be a place to report troubling behavior and protecting our marginalized youth and mitigating any kind of harmful content that they are exposed to. One of the researchers that's heavily involved in this area suggested that maybe a governing body should be put together that would include educators, mental health clinicians, researcher, parents, and even teen advocacy groups, and bringing that together to then help guide how these companies should create some restrictions might be very helpful. I don't often spend time on a slide like this, but there's some really good resources out there to help with what apps are available and how to best use them. One Mind Cyber Guide has been based on a variety of academic research. The top 10 social media apps, according to students, was a good piece that I think goes through the apps, each of them, pros and cons of each app that might be helpful. The apps for the younger group, ages 12 and under, it can be accessed on the Education App Store. I am pulling a lot of information and encourage people to listen for themselves to a series on the American Psychological Association called Speaking of Psychology. There were two that I used particularly for this presentation. By the way, they have over 200 or 300 podcasts. Some are better than others, but on any topic in terms of psychological science and human behavior, done by Kim Mills, generally very nice half hour, 40 minutes on any particular topic. There's a website called Technosapiens I mentioned earlier. Dr. Jacqueline Nisi, who's a preeminent researcher, talking more and making sound bites of research, accessible subscription based. There is usually a Monday morning push out that is free to the public, and then the rest of it needs to be paid for. It's especially good for parents who want to rely on research literature. HealthyChildren.org offers a media plan that you can put in place. It really walks you through the steps of how to create a media plan at home. I think it's very concrete. I think it's a nice recommendation for parents to use. And Common Sense Media also provides a lot of information, some of the research, and also some ratings on the apps as well. These references are really getting into the thick and the details of it and the research. I'm not going to walk through those. And at this point, we're at Q&A. I think I'm on time, Lakin.
Yeah, perfect. So if anybody has any questions, you can toss them in the chat or the Q&A and I can read them out loud. And then I did post in the chat that we will be posting a link to the recording within 1 week of today to access the webinar, so you can share it with anybody that may be interested, as well as access the references and resources again.
Yeah, I will also consider posting probably the resource slide so people can have easy access to that, and potentially do that, especially if there's some Q&A that comes through that we want to respond to after.
And then, yes, some of our presentations are for CE credit. This one is not, as it was geared more towards the parent audience.
Yeah, while people are thinking about any questions, we talked about doing that, and I felt somewhat ill at ease to create CEUs for this at this juncture. It's such a nascent field, and I think that would need to be provided, if at all, by somebody who's eminent in the research at this point, which I'm not. I'm a practitioner who gets posed many of these questions, and I've had a keen interest in the use of digital technology in mental health, more so than necessarily social media, but it comes up, I mean, almost daily in any parent session I'm in. The kids bring it up periodically as well. I actually did ask a few of the kids that I work with. I was curious to see if the data that I was quoting about utilization was spot on. And I don't know if I'm happy to say, but yes, in my small practice of several kids in the teen years of, I asked the 13 and up group, um, the utilization was spot on and the concerns were pretty spot on. And kids were not supporting banning TikTok. So, any questions, Lakin?
I don't see anything yet. Oh, are there any guidelines about the amount of time teens should spend online?
Um, I think there are not any guidelines that have been supported specifically about the amount of time. I think, again, it's the research keeps pointing to the content. However, I did find it interesting to use, and I'm thinking about this a little bit, the study that was done in the UK, and I have that in the references, and the way in which they decided to group time. And that study's technically already old, 2019, I think it was published. But breaking it into that, and that the demarcation for where it seemed to have negative impact seems to be 3+ hours. Now, again, I think if we're monitoring and if you talk to teens about what they're using online for, they're going to quote a lot of their education in school. And schools are using a lot these days in terms of social media as well as other applications for students to use. So it's a bit hard to see, but I think there's probably something. I mean, if you just think about hours in the day, if they're in school, and maybe if we took that out, and then we're thinking that they should be involved in some form of social interaction face to face and live, and that maybe sitting down at the dinner table and then potentially getting some physical exercise once in a while. I mean, where is enough hours in the day? And we want them to get their 7, 8 hours sleep if possible, which gets harder and harder with teens. But so I think there's some thought for me, the takeaway might be that if I was to talk in terms of absolute time in the day, that might be a concern. And then the weekend has to be looked at very differently. I've learned that through some of the kids I work with. The amount of time on the weekend can be really quite high, and I do think it's starting to interfere with their social lives. It's no, this is the post-COVID era, and there was a period of time where they were online all day. So many of them have gotten used to that. But the research isn't supporting a specific amount of time, no more a specific age yet.
Got it. Thank you.
Long-winded answer to a complicated question.
Any final questions for Dr. Sugarman? If not, thank you all for attending, and thank you, Elisa, for coming to talk on this topic. We
Happy to
appreciate it.
get questions after the fact. And actually, since I've had so many other professionals online, would love to hear what you're seeing, what's going on in your work, and any research or literature that you've come across. I'd love to be contacted or have you reach through our practice for future reference. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I can put our professional development email in the chat. So if you have any questions or interested in connecting with Dr. Sugarman, you can reach out to us first and we'll make the connection. Perfect. All right. Well, I hope everybody has a great rest of your Wednesday, and we hope to see you next month.